I certainly feel much better now. Okay, so just to recall, IHO S100 is based upon an overriding family of standards from ISO, the so-called 19100 series developed by the technical committee TC211. Okay, you don't have to remember all of that, but they're not just new standards created out of thin air, which was what basically S57 was. So like any good standard, there are three main things that the standard should, in theory, do. First, it includes guidance on how to implement efficient production methods. Ideally, S100 and all the standards that are based on S100, particularly S101, will not be more complicated than S57. It should be more efficient, more effective. We should be able to learn from past mistakes. That's number one. Okay. Number two, interoperability between different technologies. As we are now into the digital era, ENCs are a core component of e-navigation, and you'll see some examples of this later this week. So that interoperability, this so-called harmonized data sets, the goal of e-navigation. This is the operational concept that the ENCs of the future will be used. And third, it provides a framework of the components that can be used by others. And this in particular is the registry containing the various registers for other types of geospatial products and services. Not only for those, for say, marine environmental protection, nautical publications, as Jens just briefed us on, but for other applications as well. You've seen these before. It warrants being repeated again. Comply with emerging ISO standards. Greater support of other marine or hydrographic related products and services. To separate the data content from the encoding, and we'll get into this a little bit more specifically in just a minute. Enables a manageable flexibility that can accommodate change. As you know, it was a boneheaded idea to ever freeze S57, but the reason it was done is because we had to have some stability. And this idea of temporarily thawing the standard and then freezing it again with these supplements, this will go away. So it'll be extension rather than new versions that have to replace previous versions. There will be a registry that is compliant with the ISO standards, that flexible, capable of being used by many others, including the International Maritime Organization, IALA, other types of organizations, whether it be the World Meteorological Organization or the International Oceanographic Commission. And although I am now told as of yesterday that there will be different registers all used by the same user communities, the concept was there would be a main register for primarily hydrographic and then a supplemental register for other types of applications. Whether this has changed or not, I simply do not know. Okay. Just seeing if you remembered this, but there's the ISO 19100 series. Can be used as the basis for any contemporary standard. And the fact that it's aligned with the Open Geospatial Consortium means that we are not, in the hydrographic community, not out of alignment with what else is going on in terms of new or innovative developments. You've seen this diagram before. These are the various ISO standards that will be used in part as the framework for the S100 data standard. Okay? And the associated registry, which will have either one which will have a series of registers, whether they be main and supplemental or not. These are the various products and services that are currently envisioned, and again, that's where Jens and his nautical publications. You'll see examples later this week of gridded data, next generation ENC, and a bathymetric surface product specification. All of these are envisioned as to being in addition to the next generation ENC, which, as you recall from yesterday, that's primarily what the use of S57 was. Now, will there be others? Of course. We don't know what they are yet, but that's the beauty of this type of standard. It will accommodate change much better than S57. Now, the standard itself, and we're not going to go through page by page, but there are 12 parts to the standard. And collectively, these parts provide the so-called tools or framework that you can maintain, produce products and services through these, through the four methods and tools that you see listed here. The processing of data, the analysis of data, presenting the data or portrayal, and then transferring the data to other HOs, other users, or for other applications. Now, included in the standard then are details about how this information is exchanged. And many of you may recall that S57 was supposed to be what? An exchange standard. The reality was it became really more of a product specification for ENCs. So how the data then is exchanged between national HOs is one thing, or between other international organizations, distributed to manufacturers. In this particular case, for S101, it would be ECDIS manufacturers, used by mariners and other users. So all of this then is contained collectively in the 12 related parts. This is a listing that was taken directly from the standard. It's relatively small type, so we're not going to spend time going through this. What I will do is for each one of these 12s is briefly explain to you what are the key aspects. Okay, from yesterday we have something called a profile. And remember I talked about terminology and that words mean things? So it's important then that we clearly understand what is meant by a profile. And you can see it's defined here. A set of one or more base standards that are necessary to accomplish a particular function. All right, a quick quiz. Do we have profiles in S57? Yes, no, maybe, not sure. Okay, there's nothing the matter with not sure at this stage. That's what I thought, not sure. Okay, the concept of a profile, method of adapting the base standards so they meet a specific implementation requirement. So then really, S100 then is a set of profiles based on the ISO 19100 standards for geographic information. So profiles then are an essential concept that needs to be maintained throughout all of the documentation that relates to S100. And as you've already seen in the examples provided by both Eyvind as well as Jens, most of the documentation contained in S100 is based upon UML, the Unified Modeling Language. Okay? And with this class, object, and package diagrams you'll see throughout the standard. Now, does that mean, and this now becomes more to opinion rather than fact, does that mean all of you have to be able to read UML language to understand S100? Eyvind and Jens probably think it will be quite helpful if you do. Lee Alexander is not quite so convinced. And I would like to make a point. Two of you here I've met for the first time and I've got to know you. Commander Paul from Thailand, he's in charge of electron or nautical chart production, are you not? Okay. Most likely you will have people within your division, your department, at least one or two that are capable of doing that. Just like on board a ship, you can't possibly do everything, but if you're the commanding officer, you need to have good people capable of doing good things. So, to be able to recognize UML, to be able to appreciate its benefit, to understand why it's being used and how this is a better way of structuring and organizing information is a good idea. But I would also say the same for my colleague from the Philippines. You too are in charge of a group of people, are you not? most likely you will have to have someone within your division or department that has a capability to read, maybe even write, or to interpret UML. In my view, my opinion, that's the takeaway message. You cannot possibly be expert at this stage in your career, but you need to have people in your division or your department who are. Okay? Now, not to be afraid of this, though, what is this over here? This is a really simple example. This is things structured and organized in UML. And this is for a unit of measure. You probably can't read that. Maybe you can. But if you look up in here in terms of the type of data types, here are the various types of data that would be then described under this UML diagram. This then becomes the so-called conceptual schema language for the types of data that will be used by IHO, and more specifically identifies the combination of UML diagram and the set of basic type definitions. Well, let's see. Table 1.2, data types descriptions. Now, most of you have some proficiency to read the English language. You can read these descriptions and understand these fairly well. You can understand what the names are, but to appreciate that then these will be used in this UML structure diagram, in my view, that's the main thing. Okay? So, conceptual schema language. That's part one. And if you want to know more details, you can read it in the standard. Part two. There are geospatial information registers contained in the registry. This is in conformance with an existing ISO standard, so we're doing this based upon what others have already decided is a useful approach. And as currently planned or envisioned, the S100-based registry will contain at least these registers, something called a feature concept dictionary. All right, again, quick quiz. Feature concept dictionary. Did we have this in S57? Yes, no, maybe? We had something fairly close. What was it? Not, Avon, you're a ringer. You're not supposed to. Anybody hear what Avon said? The S57 object catalog, which was part of S57. Which appendix was it? Anybody care? No, you know it's there, but it doesn't make a difference whether Appendix 1 or Annex A or whatever. It's part of the S57 standard. So that, in some respects, is similar to the object catalog. Now, Betrayal. What would be equivalent to Betrayal in the S57 world? Right. There's nothing in S57 that deals with betrayal. It's S52. Okay, so this is different. Metadata. Tony Farrow's been saying for years we need to do a better job on collecting, storing, and organizing and access metadata. Well, now this is much better accommodated in S100 series than it ever was in S57. Product specification. Aha, that sounds familiar. We had that in S57. Data producer codes. Well, we kind of had that in S57, but that was something separate now that's been brought into S100. So when you look at this, it makes this registry not so intimidating. It's not so confusing as to what are all these boxes for anyway. And it is, in fact, S99 that describes the operational procedures for how this is organized and how it will be managed as the Geospatial Information Registry. So then this, part two, the management, will be covered by S99. Okay? Part three, rules for developing an application schema. Okay, we've already discussed what a schema is, which is a fundamental element of any product specification. Okay, general feature model. Remember Avon talking about this yesterday? Conceptual model for features or characteristics and associations. How is this, by the way, done? Using GML or XML, right? Okay. It also induces the concept of information type. We're not going to get into that a lot, but that's the general feature model. Okay. Now, do we have features in S57? Kind of. They were called objects, remember? Okay. Similar, but not quite the same. All right, metadata. Data about data content. Much better job done in S100. Much more useful information. For me in particular, in my interest and in my role in this bigger scheme of things, the identification, spatial, temporal extent, quality, application schema, spatial reference system. Why? Because I'm always thinking like a mariner. I want to know, is this data that's been provided, what is the quality of this data? How much can I rely on this? And to be provided a Cat-Zoc diagram, to me, is all it does is tell me what the hydrographer doesn't know. So this metadata actually is quite important and has a number of uses. Now, I'm occasionally teased by my colleagues and my students that I always break things down into 3 basic components. Well, if you look at this here, it's pretty much the same. Business purpose. This could be data discovery, data fitness for purpose, and again, as a mariner, this is very important. How the data will be used, how the data is shared, and how the data is managed. Those are the overall business purposes. This is part of what your job will be in your office, to make sure that the data that is collected is fit for purpose, properly used, is shared with whatever adjacent HOs or others, and that it's properly maintained and managed. This will be your main job. Now, the target audience. If it has to do with S101, who is the target audience? S101 is the next generation E&C. Who is the target audience? Mariners, carrying ectus, complying with the SOLAS Convention. Okay? So, in some respects, you could call those, anybody could be a viewer of the data, but it's the user that is, in fact, the most important, or bordering on doers. Viewers, users, doers. In some respects, they'll all be the same, but if you have simply a See My E&C viewer, that really isn't an ectus. It really isn't necessarily a mariner using this for safe navigation, but you can view the data. Okay? Metadata profile, though, this adequately describes where the data came from, all these attributes or information about it, including the source and the level of information. So, metadata, much better done than ever before. All right, feature catalog describes the content of a particular data product. Okay. Features and attributes from one or more data dictionaries. Okay, now let's go back now. Features and attributes, how would that be related to S57? We had objects for features. Exactly. All right. So for each product specification, then, this will be defined, specifically defined, and they're all drawn from this feature concept dictionary, which is contained or located where? Part of the registry and as a separate register. Okay? So let's go back real quick. Main feature concept dictionary register. That's where it's located. All right? Part 6, coordinate reference systems. Conceptual schema for describing the spatial referencing by coordinates. Okay? Now, you can see the description here. Defines minimum data for X, Y, Z spatial coordinate system, change coordinate systems, parameters and methods of operations, projections and datum transformations. Hold on. Do we have to worry a lot about this? The answer is no. Because what is the datum that will be used? What is the horizontal datum? What is the reference datum that's going to be used for the current as well as the next generation E&C? WGS84. So, IHO has therefore no plans to implement a separate register of new or different coordinate reference systems. It's already been decided. WGS84, that's what we're going to use. Okay? So, is this something you need to spend a lot of time studying? No. Spatial schema. Oh boy, schema. Okay, we've described that before. So this is describing and manipulating the spatial content of the various features. Okay, here's the ISO standard it's based on. You don't necessarily have to read it, but knowing that the spatial requirements for S100 are less comprehensive is useful to know. Now, why would this likely be so? Well, unlike land-based features, we're pretty much talking a different level of information because most things described in an ENC are X and Y, with the Z being what? Depth. Okay. Primarily involves geometry. Not going to be dealing with any topology for and the profile. And I'm not a geometry expert, but complexity, dimensionality, and functional complexity. Now, any of you ready to explain to me what the difference between complexity and functional complexity is? If you ask me, I will give you a good answer. I don't know, and what's more, I don't think I really need to know. Other than I know that there are different types of geometry and that they're based on 3 criteria. Okay? Now, this is an important point. I'm already been described yesterday as good-looking based upon my photograph. I'm also the oldest person here, so I can tell you there are times it's important to know what you don't know. And this, I think, is one of them. It's not necessary to understand this in all its dimensions as to what simple geometry. There will be others in your office that will probably have this capability. All right. Imagery and gridded data. Do we have this in S57? No. So this is something new. And this is more and more called for, more and more expected on the part of ENC users. And if you notice here, this is the organization, type of grid, metadata, spatial referencing. There is already a product specification in place for a bathymetric service product specification, S102. It's already been developed, it's already been adopted, it's already in place, well ahead of S101. Kind of interesting as to why this occurred. All right, now, this is a quick quiz. Again, anybody tell me what is the deep water and what is the shallow water? Who wants to raise their hand and tell me? What color scheme is used for deep water and what color scheme is used for shallow? Okay, blue is deep and the red and yellow are shallow. How do you know that? By experience and by it's intuitively obvious. This is a color scheme that's totally different from a paper chart and from the S52 color scheme used in ENCs. Is this a good idea? The answer is not yes, but hell yes. Why? Because if you see something like this as an overlay on an S57 ENC or as an overlay on an S101 next generation ENC, you know that it is gridded data based upon a bathymetric surface. Now, you can make this semi-transparent so you can see the ENC features underneath or on top, but this is used primarily for providing better information about precise depths and the characteristics of the seafloor. Now, as a professional mariner, I could look at this and say, this is useful information. Would I use this only, or would I use this in conjunction with an ENC? As a mariner, I'm going to use both, probably at the same time. But I can turn this off or bring in this back. You'll see examples of this on Friday, I think it is. This is part of the next generation ENC to bring in supplemental layers of information that can be used for decision support. This is a powerful tool and a real advantage of S100. Portrayal. You asked 10 people what something should look like. How many answers will you get? 11. So there will be challenges in specifying what is the best way to portray different types of symbols. What are the rules necessary to use this and associated with an S100 related data set? Not surprisingly, this has become a challenge to develop. And at present, the S100 standard does not include Part 9. They're still working on betrayal. And Eyvind or Jens or anyone, when is the target date for completion of the S100 Part 9 betrayal portion? December 2012. I think that was last year. Okay, when is the next target completion date? 2014. I still should be alive by then. Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, again, some of you might have been involved. What was the most difficult part of the first generation of ECDIS standards, S57 and S52? It was S52. Very complex, very complicated, lots of controversy. Somehow, this betrayal always is difficult, and it's no different with this new standard. Okay, encoding formats. Again, this is another quiz, just to make sure you're paying attention. ISO 8211. This is currently used to encode S57 ENC data. It's only about 25 or 30 years old. Okay. Some would suggest maybe we need to use a more useful way of structuring, organizing, encapsulating data. All right, both Eyvind and Jens briefed on this. What is it? You knew that, right? You're just testing me to make sure I'm paying attention. Okay? Yes, GML, Geographic Markup Language, XML, Extendable Markup Language. Now, that's not to say that for some of the imagery, GeoTIFF or some of these other JPEGs might be used, but these are the key aspects. Okay? Now, in theory, if we're going to have a converter from S57 into S100 related or S101 data sets, what encoding scheme should we be using? Okay, not this old-fashioned one. It should be based on this. So I think when the Republic of Korea is suggesting maybe there ought to be a different way to develop a translator, if you will, or a converter, someone needs to look at GML and XML and not rely on the old-fashioned way. Okay, product specification. Most of you are familiar with this. In some respects, this is not anything new than what was done in S57. All of the features, attributes, relationships for a given application and its mapping to a data set. There were, as you recall, some complex attributes that were used for aids to navigation in S57. Maybe there's a better way in which to do that in the future. But certainly the goal, clear and consistent structure of any data, and must conform to the other standards. The profile must conform. All right? Do you remember what a profile is? Right. And if you briefly, and this will occur as you go through the standard, one or more set of base standards that are necessary to accomplish a particular function. In this particular case, a product specification. Okay? So, words mean things. We will probably have to have some sort of glossary of terms, glossary of terminology that people can go to. So when you read S100, you'll know what a profile means. A profile is not Lee Alexander standing sideways or sideways like this. It's something different. Okay? Maintenance. This is the last part, not surprisingly. How do you maintain and publish the various parts of S100? Well, the concept is fairly valid, but the registry is going to be covered in S99. In other words, the process where you establish a registry and the registers and who maintains them, that's an S99. The maintenance regime, though, of a particular individual product specification is contained in the standard itself. Now, there is a concept that I want to make sure you understand. At the bottom is a saying by Cicero, a quote by Cicero in Latin, nec audivustum montanda esse. Cicero was one of my heroes because he was able to say things very simply that still apply 2,000 years later. Any of you have any proficiency in Latin? Not to worry. Loosely translated, that's what it means. Nothing ever stays the same. Everything is constantly changing, so maintenance is an important aspect of S100 in that there's a proper way to maintain, keep up to date, keep the information current and relevant. We have a difficult time in S57. Hopefully it won't be as difficult in S100. In summary, those are the main parts. If you need more information, you can go to the standard. But understanding what is in the standard is key. Being an expert in all aspects, I don't believe for the type of role that you will be conducting in your office, it's necessary to be an expert on everything. Questions? Comments?
Can we have the register as a domain? Because your presentation yesterday mentioned about the domain.
A domain means that there's a certain level of expertise or knowledge about a particular subject matter area. Hydrography in general is a domain. Aids to navigation would be another domain. But even within hydrography, nautical publications would be a domain. Marine information overlays would be another domain. Inland electronic charts, inland ENCs, port ENCs, these would all be separate domains where you have people who are expert. For instance, I serve as the technical coordinator for North America for the Inland ENC Harmonization Group. The types of aids and navigation on the major river systems in North America are different than those in Europe, the Russian Federation, and in particular South America. And more recently, we have found that they're different than from China or from India. But all of these regions, all of these nations belong, and we are looking for ways of commonality such that we all become knowledgeable about what other requirements are and make sure that the Inland ENC standard can accommodate all of these. So then, in doing so, you become not an expert, but knowledgeable about this particular domain. Now, the reason I mention this is that some of you, I know in Thailand you have some vessels that come all the way up into Bangkok, I think. But for the most part, they're smaller vessels, are they not? Not soulless vessels. China is here. You have major waterway systems. The Yangtze, the Yellow River goes 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers into the heart of China. And there will have to be decisions on the different types of data being provided by the different river commissions to support different types of navigation. And then for some river systems, it may be both, like in the United States as well as China, that you have both inland ENCs and maritime ENCs for different types of vessels. That would be domain. Other questions, comments?
Can you share with us the progress or timeline for S100? You mentioned the support, a variety of data sources, products, and services. Is that possible you roughly indicate to us what is the actual work plan for this development and the status?
Sure.
Thank you.
Linwei, this is what's currently on the IHO website, which we know is not accurate, not up to date. This is what has been proposed as the timetable or the series of steps. And it's basically about 2018 that we expect that S101 ENCs will begin to become available, maybe not required for use, but will become available. Everything else has to be done in sequence. Is this what you're asking?
I refer to the slide. So you just mentioned that S102, the work that is completed.
It's been completed.
How about like MIO,
Has
web
not,
services?
has not started, and I'll tell you why.
The work have not started.
No. Until we know more what S101 will be or will not be, that is the primary focus now, and the other types of supplemental information that are currently available in S57 will continue to be used. For time and effort to be spent trying to develop an S100 product specification for marine information overlays when there are no S101 ENCs is premature. Okay? It's not a waste of time, it's premature. So until this S101 is completed, some of these others will wait. Now, for the bathymetric surface, there are many people that are using this for other reasons, seafloor classification, fisheries, a variety of things, having nothing to do with marine navigation. But when mariners see this, they say, I can use that right now. And in fact, every time a multi-beam survey is done in a channel, I would like to get that overlay. And there are some maritime pilots that literally get within 24 to 48 hours that supplemental layer based upon multi-beam survey that's been converted into a bathymetric surface that is used as an overlay on an S57 ENC. And as far as they're concerned, they're saying, I can use this now. I'm not waiting for S101.
So likely the S101 third draft will be completed by this year or third or fourth quarter 2001 on this slide.
The plan or the proposed is the end of this year, October, November. Do I really think this is going to occur? No. It slipped before, it will slip again. I think no, it's better not. I need more beers in me to tell you what I really think, but
I understand IHB.
Yeah. I do know that, before Tony responds, that there are increased efforts to more specifically develop a timetable, a plan of action, a sequence. What comes first? What's most important? What has to be done in the proper order? Not everything is equally important when you develop something. And TSMAD, I think, is at times quite eager to do everything all at once. Everything's exciting. And yet, that's not been the successful approach. So if you look at this first draft, when will the second draft be? Well, if you look at this diagram, there's no mention of a second draft. There's no mention of a final draft. So how many drafts will there be? Will this be perfect the first time? No. Okay? So this is a concept. This is a sequential timetable. It's better than what is currently on the IHO website, but it's going to be a while. Anything to add, Tony, to this? I'm trying to be as optimistic and positive as I can, but I look at this and say, like any plan, it's going to change.
Yeah, the plan is for the next TSMAD meeting, which is in December. I'll start by saying I'm no more optimistic than you are. But the plan is to
2013?
this year, But as I say,
A final draft or the first draft?
well, first draft.
Yeah, okay.
A final draft of the first draft. Because we've been having the first draft for a long time.
Does that answer your question, Limwee? Again, it's proven to be a much more challenging process. Now, if you look on here, when is this betrayal going to be sorted out? By December?
Portrayal, if I just take a step back for portrayal, the portrayal in a way was held up by the ISO standard 19117, which is the ISO standard on portrayal. And there was as big a bun fight within the ISO community about portrayal as there was with S52. So the portrayal, the ISO 19117, which is the portrayal, that was only completed and became an international standard in December 2012. So to a certain extent, portrayal was held up by that. But the problem is that S100 is subject to resolution 2, I think it is of 2007, which means for us to produce a new edition of S100, and there's a lot to go in for a new edition of S100, it has to go through the process which is described in resolution 2, and which is quite a long process. It's got to be approved by HSSC, so it's not something we can turn around quickly.
Yeah. I can look at this as another way, okay? There is an implementation period occurring for mandatory ECDIS carriage under the new SOLAS Chapter 5 revisions. They went into force last year, 2012. It's a 6-year implementation, staggered implementation. Remember you saw the slide yesterday showing the different vessels? That will not be completed until 2018. As far as most of us that are familiar with IMO and how it operates, there'll be no new requirement for anything but S57 E&Cs, at least until 2018. Now, will the S101 standard be ready? Will it be housebroken? Will it be complete and all the problems and things sorted out? Hopefully. But the requirement to use S101 E&Cs would not come before 2018 under regulations, under international convention. Okay, Havend?
Could I suggest that we park this discussion? I have a slightly more updated slide on the new on these timetables, and I can do that after my presentation.
Sure.
So we can be pull up more here after.
Okay. Mr. Beck or Dr. O, I have 25 after 11. I'm not sure what time I'm supposed to finish, but I think we've reached a good stopping point. Is this okay? Anything else? I mean, we're all here. We eat lunch together. We have dinner. We have beers. So don't hesitate.
If the first draft ready by end this year, how about the industry? Whether software data
See here, Limwee, draft data distributed to system manufacturers for review and comment. This will be their initial review, but until it's actually tested, shore trials, simulator facility, and again at sea, we really won't know whether it works. And then there has to be a type approval process. And to do that, you need IEC, Technical Committee 80, to establish a working group to develop the next edition of IEC 61174. That usually takes 2 years. And then type approval of an ECDIS capable of reading or dealing with S101. So for all of this to occur by 2018, unlikely. But does that mean that an e-navigation compliant ECDIS capable of reading S101? Potentially, but will they be type approved? Probably not. Now, of course, if you believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, plug and play will solve everything. And I'm told maybe even world hunger and world peace. We don't know yet, but plug and play. It's going to be the answer to everything. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, but I yet to believe in plug and play. But so, will all S57 be converted? No. And if anything, my prediction is that we'll have dual fuel ECDIS for quite some time, capable of reading S57 or S101. And who will decide what data to use? It'll probably be the mariner based upon best available information, up to date for the intended voyage, fit for purpose. And if a mariner says, I use S57, have been for the past 5 years, I know its capability and limitations, this S101 is new, not so sure about this yet. He'll continue to use S57 ENCs. But this is way in the future. This is 6 years from now, so we'll see. Okay, thank you very much.